Get yourself comfortable, and when you're ready, we'll begin. The garden appeared between one breath and the next. Materializing at the end of a street Maggie could have sworn ended in a brick wall just yesterday, just this morning, just moments ago before she turned the corner and found herself standing before an arched gateway wrought from living vines. From branches that had grown together so seamlessly, it was impossible to say where one plant ended and another began. Where intention had shaped growth into architecture, into invitation, into an entrance that seemed to say, "Enter, this is for you." Maggie stood at the threshold, her long dark hair the color of a rich espresso coffee, deep, deep brown, lifting slightly in a breeze that carried scents she could not quite identify, couldn't name, fragrances that suggested flowers she had never encountered, perfumes that belonged to blooms that perhaps existed nowhere else, that grew only here, in this garden, that appeared when someone needed it, that manifested when the world became a little too heavy, too loud, too relentless, when a soul required sanctuary, yearned for beauty, needed the particular healing that only growing things could provide. She stepped through the arch and the world changed. Not in a dramatic fashion. There was no huge flash of lightning, no sensation of crossing between dimensions, but subtle, gentle, the way evening changes into night, the way worry melts into calm, the gradual shift that happens when you stop resisting and start allowing, when you relax and let yourself be carried, when you surrender to the current and discover it was always moving towards your greatest fulfillment, benevolent, beneficial. The path beneath her feet was smooth, worn soft by centuries of footsteps, or perhaps by magic, by the garden's own intention to provide comfort, stability, to eliminate harshness, to create a walkway that even welcomed bare feet, that invited slow walking, that encouraged the kind of wandering that was really wandering, that asked nothing except presence, attention, the willingness to see what was being proffered. And what was being proffered was a seemingly endless array of flowers and trees. Not just flowers, but flowers everywhere, in every direction, in every possible configuration and combination, in colors that made the heart sing with their intensity, their purity, their absolute refusal to be anything less than fully, completely, impossibly gorgeous. To her left grew blooms of deep crimson that shaded to burgundy at their centers, their petals layered like the finest silk, like folded paper in origami, like the work of an artist who understood that beauty lived in the details, in the way light caught edges, in the subtle gradations between one shade and the next. To her right bloomed flowers of palest pink that deepened to rose, to fuchsia, to a magenta so luminous it seemed to glow from within, as though each bloom contained a small flame, a tiny sun, a fragment of dawn captured and held in living organisms. And ahead lay such a profusion of color, such an abundance of form and fragrance, that Maggie felt her breath catch, felt something in her chest expand, felt a yes rising from depths she had not known existed until now, a recognition that this was what she had been missing, what she had been seeking without knowing she sought it, what her soul had been yearning for, beneath all the noise of daily living, beneath all the infinite tasks of doing and managing and coping. She walked slowly along the path, her eyes moving from flower to flower, each one a living masterpiece, each one perfect in its own particular way, each one contributing to the symphony of color and form that transformed the garden from collection into creation, from assemblage into art, from mere botanical display into something that approached the sacred, the numinous, the divine made tangible. And then she saw it, a flower unlike any she had ever encountered. It grew alone in a small clearing just off the main path, standing perhaps 3 feet tall, its stem thick and strong, its leaves broad and glossy. But the flower itself, the flower commanded all attention, demanded acknowledgement, insisted on being seen, being appreciated, being recognized as the marvel it was. The bloom was trumpet-shaped like a lily but larger, more dramatic, its petals curving outward from a central throat, creating a form that was both architectural and organic, both precisely geometric and wildly natural. And the color was turquoise, but turquoise was insufficient, was too simple a word for the complexity of hue that met the eye. It was the turquoise of tropical waters, of Caribbean seas, but even more vivid, more saturated, more intense. It was the aqua of certain stones, Pariba tourmaline, amazonite, but alive, vibrant, possessing depth and dimension that no mineral could match. It was turquoise with hints of blue, suggestions of green, whispers of silver at the petal edges, all of it combining into a color that could not exist, that should not exist. Yet here it was, undeniable and perfect, and so beautiful it made her eyes well up. Maggie moved closer, drawn by curiosity, by desire, by the simple human need to approach beauty, to close the distance between self and wonder, to stand in the presence of something extraordinary and allow it to work its transformation, its subtle magic, its mysterious influence on perception, on mood, on the very quality of consciousness. As she approached, the scent reached her, not overwhelming, not loud, but insistent, pervasive, filling the space around the flower with a fragrance that was at once sweet and fresh, heavy yet light, complex beyond description. It smelled of sweetness and fresh rain, of cardamom, and something else, something green and vibrant, something that suggested soil and sunlight, and the patient work of roots drawing nourishment from earth, of photosynthesis transforming light into life, of the endless miracle that was growth, that was flowering, that was the plant's offering to the world. I am here. I am beautiful. Breathe me in. Let me ease your burdens. She breathed deeply, filling her lungs with the scent, and felt something happen. A slowing, a softening, a gentle descent into a state that was not quite sleep, but close to it. A deep, deep relaxation that was soporific in the best sense, in the healing sense, in the way that suggested rest was inevitable, was available, was being offered right now, right here, by this flower that seemed to exist specifically to ease minds, to calm hearts, to provide the deep release that the body needed, that the soul craved, that modern life made sometimes very difficult to access. She stood swaying slightly, breathing the turquoise flower's perfume, feeling her muscles release tension she had not known they were holding, feeling her jaw unclench, her shoulders drop, her spine lengthen as though invisible strings were being cut, as though weights were being lifted, as though she was being gradually unburdened of accumulated stress, worry, fear, doubt. Doubt that she had carried everywhere, always a constant background noise that she had learned to ignore, but which nonetheless drained her energy, her joy, her capacity to be present to beauty, to wonder, to the simple miracle of being alive. Eventually, she could not say how long she stood there, time having grown elastic, unreliable, blessedly irrelevant. She stepped back from the turquoise flower, her head clearing slightly, though the ease remained, the relaxation persisted. A gift that would not be rescinded, that had been given and could not be given back. She continued along the path, and other flowers greeted her, not with words, but with presence, with a particular quality that each brought, each offered. Each contributed to the garden's collective personality, its strange sentience, its apparent awareness of her movement through its spaces. Then a flower that was the most intense violet she had ever seen, a purple so deep and rich it seemed to contain all violets, all purples, every shade from lavender to plum compressed into this single bloom. Its center was bright yellow, creating a contrast so stark, so perfect, that it seemed intentional. It seemed designed, seemed to be the work of an artist who understood color theory perfectly, who knew how complementary hues enhanced one another, who created not randomly but with purpose, with vision, with a desire to maximize beauty, to create maximum impact, to make the viewer stop and stare and feel something shift inside their chest. The flower looked like a pansy, but much larger, its petals overlapping in the characteristic pattern. Its face turned toward her as she approached, following her movement the way sunflowers follow the sun, tracking her progress with what seemed like attention, like curiosity, like a greeting. "Hello," the flower seemed to say, not in words but in gesture, in the way it turned its yellow-scented violet face toward her, in the way it nodded silently in the breeze, in the way its presence felt welcoming, warm, felt like recognition, like the garden had been expecting her, had known she was coming, had prepared for her arrival by blooming, by opening, by offering its beauty as a gift, as medicine, as the specific healing that this particular moment required. Maggie smiled, feeling slightly daft, but also feeling something else. Feeling seen, feeling acknowledged, feeling that her presence mattered, that she was not invisible, not insignificant, not merely one more person moving through an indifferent world, but someone special, someone noticed, someone the garden had manifested for, had appeared for, had offered itself to with generosity, with kindness, with the unconditional welcome that the natural world extends to all who approach it with open hearts, with genuine need, with the willingness to receive what is offered. Flowers grew everywhere, climbing trellises that appeared and disappeared, their structures as magical as the garden itself, as impermanent and eternal, there when needed and absent when not. Flowers spilled from stone urns that might have been ancient or might have been created that morning. Time having no meaning here, history collapsing into the eternal present where everything existed simultaneously, where past and future dissolved into now. There were roses in shades of coral and apricot, their petals so numerous and so perfectly arranged that each bloom looked like a small universe, a galaxy spiraling inward toward a center that promised secrets, mysteries, truths that could only be accessed through beauty, through patience, through the willingness to look closely, to pay attention, to notice what was actually present, as opposed to what the mind expected to see. There were lilies, not just the turquoise trumpet, but others, star-shaped and exotic, their stamens protruding like tiny antennae, their petals spotted and striped and painted with patterns that nature had perfected over millions of years of evolution, of trial and error, of the slow, patient work of becoming more beautiful, more appealing, more irresistible to the pollinators, who would ensure survival, who would carry pollen from flower to flower, who would participate in the ancient dance of reproduction, of continuation, of life perpetuating itself through beauty, through attraction, through the fundamental force that drew beings together, the force we call desire, but which might more accurately be called love, called yearning, called the universe recognizing itself across apparent separation and moving to close the distance, to merge, to become one. There were flowers she had no names for, blooms that seemed to be combinations of familiar forms, hybrids that should not exist, but yet here they were, experiments in color and shape and scent that the garden conducted freely, unbound by the rules that governed ordinary growing, that limited possibility, that said some things could not be crossed, could not merge, could not create offspring that carried traits from both parents, that expressed characteristics previously unknown, previously unimagined. One flower caught her eye, impossibly large, its bloom the size of a dinner plate, its petals a gradient that moved from white at the edges through cream and butter yellow to a center of deep gold, almost orange, like sunrise compressed into circular form, like dawn made flower, like the promise of new days, new beginnings, new chances rendered its living organism as beauty that would fade and return, that would bloom and wither and bloom again, demonstrating the eternal cycle, the endless return, the way nothing was ever truly lost because everything transformed. Everything became something else. Everything participated in the great circulation of matter and energy that animated the universe, that made life possible, the promise of continuation. Maggie walked on, drawn deeper into the garden by instinct, by intuition, by the sense that something waited at its center, something important, something she needed to find, to see, to experience for herself. The path curved and twisted, revealing new vistas with each turn, new collections of blooms, new combinations of color, new fragrances that layered and blended, creating an olfactory symphony that changed with each step, with each breath, with each moment of progress deeper into this impossible space that seemed larger inside than its boundaries suggested, that operated according to dream logic, according to the fluid geometry of the imagination, where distance and direction became suggestions rather than facts, where arrival happened not through measurement, but through readiness, through openness, through the visitor's willingness to see what was being shown. And then the path opened into a clearing, and there it was, the heart of the garden, the center around which everything else revolved, the source from which all this beauty flowed, the whispering willow. It stood in the exact middle of the clearing, its trunk thick and gnarled, speaking of age beyond reckoning, of centuries spent in this spot, in this sacred center, anchoring the garden, holding space, providing the stability that allowed everything else to flourish, to experiment, to become. Its branches swept downward in the characteristic willow gesture, creating a living curtain, a natural room, a space both enclosed and open, both hidden and accessible. But this was no ordinary willow. This was not the common green of Salix babylonica, not the golden hue of Salix alba tristis, not any shade that willow typically displayed. This willow was blue. Blue in a way that defied categorization, that resisted simple description, that demanded attention, contemplation, the slow consideration of someone trying to capture in words what the eyes reported but the mind struggled to accept. The trunk was blue, a soft muted blue like faded denim, like morning sky, like the particular shade that appears at the horizon where sky begins to meet earth, where color shifts from the deeper blue of zenith toward something lighter, something that contains hints of gray, suggestions of white, whispers of the illumination to come. But the leaves were where the magic lived, where the impossible became undeniable, where nature revealed its capacity for wonder, for deviation from norm, for expressing possibilities that seemed to belong to fantasy, to imagination, to the realm of things dreamed rather than things grown. The leaves were cornflower blue, that clear, bright blue that speaks of summer gardens, of clear skies, of waters so pure you can see all the way to the bottom. But at their edges, where the color should have continued or deepened, it instead shifted, transformed, became something else. Became silver, metallic, reflective and bright, catching light and throwing it back, creating a shimmer, a glow, an aura around the entire tree that made it seem not quite solid, not quite real, not bound by the rules that governed ordinary matter. The branches swayed, though there was no wind, moved in gentle rhythms that suggested breathing, that implied consciousness, that made the tree seem less like a plant and more like a being, a creature, an entity with awareness, with intention, with a capacity to notice visitors, to welcome guests, to offer what they most needed. Positioned perfectly in the small circle of open space that the hanging branches created sat a bench. It was simple in design, wooden, with a curved back and a seat just wide enough for one person, intimate rather than social, a place for solitary contemplation, a spot designed for the work of being alone, of being with oneself, of encountering the inner landscape without distraction, without interruption, without the performance required by the presence of others. The bench seemed to invite her, to call to her, to suggest with its perfect positioning and its careful craftsmanship that it had been placed here specifically for her, that it had been waiting for her arrival, that it wanted nothing more than to hold her, to support her, to provide the physical comfort that would allow mental and emotional rest, that would create conditions for the kind of deep relaxation that the body wanted, that the soul craved. Maggie pushed through the hanging branches. They parted easily, willingly, like a curtain drawn back to reveal what had been hidden, and entered the willow's embrace, entered the blue-tinged sanctuary, the sacred space at the garden's heart. The quality of light changed inside the willow's canopy, became softer, more diffuse, filtered through thousands of blue silver leaves that created a light unlike any other, a glow that was neither blue nor white, but something in between, something that made everything it touched seem dreamlike, gentle, safe. She approached the bench and sat. In the moment her body made contact with the wood, she felt it. A sense of being held, supported, of being cradled in wooden arms that adjusted to her form, seemed to know exactly where she needed support, where she needed softness, where she needed the firm presence that allowed complete letting go. The bench welcomed her weight, eliminated all pressure points, all discomfort, creating a feeling of such perfect physical ease that her body immediately began to release, to relax, to surrender the constant low-level tension that modern humans carried, that came from sitting in chairs not designed for bodies, from moving through spaces not built for rest, from living in a world that prioritized productivity over peace, efficiency over ease. She leaned back against the curved support and felt her spine lengthen, her shoulders drop, her head settle into perfect alignment, and with each adjustment, Each small drift toward comfort, she felt something else happening. Her breathing deepening, her thoughts slowing, her awareness turning inward, away from the external world, away from the garden's beauty, away from everything except the sensation of simply being, of existing, of breathing in and breathing out, of pulse and circulation, of the automatic processes that sustained life, that required no thought, no effort, that simply continued reliably, constantly, keeping her alive without asking permission, without requiring gratitude, simply doing what they did because it was their nature, their purpose, their contribution to the miracle of her existence. She drifted into a state that was neither waking nor sleeping, but somewhere between, a trance, a meditation, a deep calm that allowed consciousness to function differently, to access layers usually hidden, to perceive dimensions normally unavailable, to see not with eyes, but with some deeper vision, some inner sight that looked beyond surfaces, beyond present circumstances, beyond the limitation of ordinary perception. And in this state, visions came. Visions in the sense of seeing clearly, of perceiving truly, of accessing the part of herself that knew what she wanted, what she needed, what she hoped for when she let herself hope, when she allowed herself to dream, when she gave permission for desires to surface, for longings to be acknowledged, for the future to show itself not as anxiety or dread, but as possibility, as potential, as the unwritten story waiting to be lived. She saw herself in a home filled with light, somewhere quiet, somewhere that had windows facing gardens, facing trees, facing growing things that changed with seasons, that marked time through blooming and fruiting, and the slow, patient work of being rooted, being grounded, being connected to the earth. She saw herself with time, spacious time, generous time, time that could be spent slowly, that could be used without guilt, that could be devoted to simple pleasures, to small joys, to the activities that nourished soul rather than just served necessity. She saw herself creating, her hands busy with work that satisfied, that engaged, that produced beauty or usefulness, or maybe both. Work that came from somewhere deep within her, from some wellspring of creativity that she had been ignoring, that she had been far too busy to access, that waited patiently for attention, for acknowledgement, for the time and space to express itself. The vision shifted, and she saw not future but past, not dreams but memories, not what might be but what had been, but memories transformed, memories illuminated, memories revealed as treasures, as gifts, as the foundations upon which everything else was built. She saw her beloved aunt, Aunt Margaret, for whom she had been named Maggie. That had become her own name, that had been spoken with such love, such warmth, such delight by this woman who had been more than an aunt, who had been a mentor, a friend, the person who saw her clearly and reflected back, not judgment or criticism, but appreciation, celebration, the simple joy of her existence. Her aunt appeared in the vision as she had been, not young, not old, but somehow ageless in the way that certain people achieve when they have found contentment, when they have made peace with life, when they radiate the quiet satisfaction of someone who has learned what matters and dedicated themselves to it without apology or explanation, without the constant doubt that plagued those still searching. Aunt Margaret stood in her kitchen, the kitchen that Maggie had spent so many afternoons in, so many weekends, flour on her hands, apron tied around her waist, the smell of baking filling the air. That incomparable scent of butter and sugar and blueberries transforming in heat, becoming something much more than ingredients, becoming comfort, becoming love made edible, made shareable, made into an offering that said without words, I love you. I want you to experience pleasure. I am giving you my time, my presence, my attention, and I'm doing it gladly. The blueberry muffins, oh, the blueberry muffins, perfectly domed, golden brown on top, bursting with fruit that stained the batter purple, that released juice when bitten into, that created that perfect balance of sweet and tart, of soft and slightly crisp where the sugar on top had caramelized, of warm and cool where butter melted on top, of muffins just cool enough to eat. But it was not just the muffins, though they were perfect. Though they were the best she had ever tasted, though she had tried dozens of times to recreate them and never quite succeeded, because the secret ingredient was not in the recipe, but in the love that went into the mixing, in the care that regulated the oven temperature and checked the baking and knew exactly when they were done. Her aunt had taught her to crochet, patient lessons in the same kitchen, sitting at the table with yarn and hooks, learning to create chain stitches, learning to build row upon row until patterns emerged, until the simple became complex, until individual stitches became fabric, became blankets and scarves, and small tokens of love that could be gifted, could be kept, could be wrapped around shoulders or spread across laps, physical manifestations of time well spent, attention given, love made tangible. But more than any specific skill, her aunt had taught her a way of being, had shown her through example that life did not require constant drama, constant striving, constant proof of worth through productivity or accumulation, that it was enough, more than enough, to be kind, to be present, to notice beauty, to appreciate small pleasures, to find satisfaction in simple rituals, in daily practices, in the reliable comforts that anchored existence. Her aunt had taught her to see the best in herself and others, not through blind optimism or denial of difficulty, but through the conscious choice to look for what was good, what was trying, what was doing its best with limited resources, with accumulated hurts, with the confusion that came from growing up in a world that did not explain itself clearly, that gave contradictory messages, that demanded impossible things, and then criticized failure. And her aunt had taught her to enjoy, truly enjoy, the simple pleasures of each day, the warm shower in the morning, the first vibrant contact of hot water on skin, the steam rising, the way muscles loosened, the way tension dissolved, The way something as simple as water heated and delivered through pipes could create a moment of pure sensory pleasure, of gratitude, of appreciation for modern convenience, for the infrastructure that made comfort possible. The piping hot cup of coffee on a winter morning, holding the mug with both hands, feeling warmth seep into palms, into fingers, breathing in the steam, the scent of roasted beans, of bitter and nutty notes, of the particular chemistry that turned green seeds into brown beans, into ground powder, into liquid that woke the body, that sharpened the mind, that marked the transition from sleep to waking, from dream to day. The beauty of the first snowfall, watching from the window as large fluffy clumps of puffy snow drifted down, transforming the familiar landscape into something new, something pristine, covering everything in white, in softness, in the gentle accumulation of frozen crystals that created beauty through collective effort, through countless small contributions that added up to transformation, to wonder, to the miracle of weather, of season, of Earth's endless variations, its capacity for change, its refusal to repeat itself exactly, making each winter different, each storm unique, each snowfall a new expression of the same eternal pattern. These things, these simple, ordinary, everyday things, her aunt had elevated, had honored, had treated as worthy of attention, of appreciation, of the kind of reverence usually reserved for grand occasions, for special events, for the supposedly important moments that everyone agreed deserved celebration. But Aunt Margaret had known and had taught Maggie that life was not the highlights, but the texture, not the peaks, but the plateaus as well, not the dramatic moments, but the steady accumulation of small experiences that together created the felt sense of what it meant to be alive, to be embodied, to move through time in human form on a planet that provided endless opportunities for appreciation, for wonder, for the quiet joy that came from simply noticing, paying attention, being present to what was actually happening, rather than what the mind said should be happening. Sitting beneath the whispering willow, drifting in the deep calm state that the garden had created, that the bench had facilitated, that the blue-silver light had made possible, Maggie felt her aunt's presence. Not as a ghost, not as memory exactly, but as something more solid, more real, more present than memory usually was, as though the garden had reached across time, across the boundary between living and past, and brought her aunt here, brought her into this moment, allowed them to share this space, this peace, this profound comfort that soaked into every fiber of Maggie's being. She felt deeply comforted, held not just by the bench, but by her aunt's love, which had not ended with breath, which continued somehow, which lived on in the lessons taught, in the values transmitted, in the way Maggie herself moved through the world when she remembered, when she accessed the part of herself that her aunt had nurtured, had cultivated, had watered and fed and encouraged to thrive. She felt reinvigorated, filled with renewed energy, not despite the relaxation, but because of it, because rest restored, because peace replenished, because the body could not continue indefinitely without pause, without the opportunity to repair, to rebuild, to process all that had accumulated, to clear out what no longer served, to make space for new experiences, new joys, new possibilities. She felt a sense of joy rising, not manic, but something quiet, more sustainable, more reliable, the joy that came from alignment, from being in accord with oneself, from touching the place within that knew truth, that recognized beauty, that understood without words what mattered and what did not, what was essential and what was merely noise. And beneath all of this, permeating everything, saturating every cell, every thought, every breath, she felt peace. Deep peace, profound peace. The peace that soaked into every fiber of her being and changed something fundamental, changed the base frequency at which she operated, changed the lens through which she perceived, changed the story she told about who she was and what life was and what was possible. Time passed, though how much time she could not say, had no desire to calculate, found it irrelevant in this space where clocks held no authority, where measurement meant nothing, where the only thing that mattered was the quality of presence, the depth of rest, the completeness of the experience. Gradually, gently, like surfacing from a pond, like waking from perfect sleep, like returning from a journey that had taken her far but brought her back exactly where she started, only changed, transformed, carrying gifts that had been given, wisdom that had been accessed, peace that had been reclaimed. Gradually, gently, Maggie became aware of the bench beneath her, of the willow above her, of the garden surrounding her. She opened her eyes, and the blue-silver light greeted her, welcomed her back, congratulated her on the journey completed, the rest achieved, the healing received. She stood slowly, her body feeling different, lighter, softer, more flexible, as though the deep relaxation had loosened something, had released some chronic holding, some habitual bracing against life that she had not known she was doing, but which, in its absence, revealed how much energy it had been consuming, how much vitality it had been stealing. She pushed through the willow's branches and emerged back into the garden, back into the riot of color and scent, into the abundance of beauty that grew everywhere, that bloomed in every direction, that offered itself freely to any who had eyes to see, hearts to receive, hands to hold. The path back appeared before her, though she could not remember which direction she had come from, could not trace her steps, could not locate the route she had taken. But it did not matter because the garden knew. The garden guided. It ensured that those who entered found their way out, found their way home, carrying with them what they had been given, what they had discovered, what they had remembered